Picture this. The Nexus Interstellar Academy floating majestically between the 3 moons of Centauri Prime, its crystalline structures reflecting the light of twin stars. This was the epicenter of the Galactic Federation's military education, where the best and brightest from dozens of worlds came to learn the art of space warfare. Now, in Classroom 847 Beta, Professor Zythara, a blue-skinned Altarian with pulsating brain tentacles, was adjusting the holographic projectors for another stellar battle class. Her students? They represented the diversity of the galaxy, the massive Kronar from Vega 7 with their chitinous carapaces, the ethereal Sylph from the Rose Nebula whose translucent bodies glowed softly, and the cybernetic Andromedans, half-cyborgs with visible neural implants. And there, sitting in the back of the class, almost unnoticed among the others, was George Frash, one of the few humans at the Academy. At a modest 5'9", with what seemed like a fragile build compared to his classmates, George was frequently underestimated. But his brown eyes sparkled with a sharp intelligence that few bothered to notice. "All right, class. Today you'll be simulating the Battle of Orion's Belt," Zythara announced, her tentacles waving with authority. "You'll work in pairs to command fleets of cruiser class." But then a soft alarm echoed through the corridor. The door slid open to reveal Director Keth Moran, a battle-scarred Centaurian veteran whose war wounds told stories of 1,000 conflicts. His normally stone-cold expression, it showed some serious tension. "Professor Zythara," his deep voice rumbled, "we have a new student." And that's when everything went sideways. Behind him stepped a figure that made every single being in that room freeze in pure terror. We're talking 8.5 feet of nightmare fuel, organic black armor that looked like it had grown straight out of its skin, bone spikes jutting from shoulders and forearms like natural weapons. And the eyes? 4 of them, glowing deep red like the last embers of a dying star, arranged in a diamond pattern that seemed to pierce right through your soul. "Ladies and gentlemen, meet your friendly neighborhood Palladium warrior." The silence that crashed down on that classroom was absolutely deafening. I mean, you could hear a pin drop in the vacuum of space. Some students instinctively backed away like they'd just spotted death itself. Others? They straight up submitted, lowering their eyes because that's what you do when you're in the presence of apex predators. The Kronar. These guys are literally known throughout the galaxy for being fearless. Even they pulled back into their defensive shells. And get this, even the arrogant Andromedans started shutting down their systems so they wouldn't seem threatening. See, here's the thing about Palladium that you need to understand. This isn't just some scary planet. This is the scary planet, the murder world. The place that had obliterated 3 entire Federation exploration fleets before they even became members. We're talking about warriors so savage in combat that they could literally tear apart spaceships with their bare claws when their weapons ran out. There were whispered stories, and I mean whispered because nobody wanted to say this stuff out loud, about how a single Palladium warrior had faced down an entire century of Federal Marines and walked away. These weren't just soldiers. They were living nightmares that happened to have joined the good guys. "This is Krix'tar Vel'than," the director said, very carefully avoiding direct eye contact with the alien. Smart move, honestly. Krix'tar made what might have been a bow, but to everyone watching it looked more like a predator sizing up its next meal. When he spoke? Oh man, his voice was this low, controlled growl that somehow managed to be both respectful and absolutely terrifying. "I honor this place of learning. I shall not spill unnecessary blood." That last word hung in the air like a promise, and a threat rolled into one beautiful, horrifying package. "Very well." Zythara fought to maintain her professional composure, which, honestly, props to her. "As I was saying, you'll be working in pairs. Please form your groups." What happened next was basically a masterclass in cowardly diplomacy. Students who normally fought tooth and nail for the best partners were now scrambling to pair up with literally anyone as long as it wasn't the Palladium warrior. The room filled with nervous whispers while everyone did their absolute best to avoid looking in Krix'tar's direction. There he stood, isolated like some kind of dark mountain in the middle of the classroom. But George? George was watching this whole spectacle with growing interest. See, he'd actually done his homework on the Palladium, not the sensationalized horror stories that got passed around the dorms, but the real academic reports. Yeah, they were fierce warriors, no question about that. But they also had this incredibly sophisticated military culture with rigid codes of honor. The fact that one of them was even at the academy, that was historic. So while the last few groups were frantically forming, George did something that probably broke every single survival instinct in the book. He stood up, walked calmly across the room, and approached the 8.5-foot death machine like he was asking someone to pass the salt. The silence in the room became absolutely nuclear. "Would you like to partner with me?" George asked, extending his hand in greeting. I cannot even begin to describe the shock that rippled through that classroom. Several students let out these strangled gasps. One Kronar actually started laughing, this nervous, high-pitched sound that was equal parts terror and disbelief. "The human's lost his mind. That thing is going to tear him apart." "Typical Terran," an Andromedans muttered, his voice dripping with condescension. "Small brains, big egos." "He won't last 5 minutes," added a sylph, its translucent form literally shimmering with cruel amusement. But here's where it gets interesting. Krix'tar tilted his massive head, studying George with all 4 of those burning red eyes. For what felt like an eternity, everyone in that room was waiting for the explosion of violence. The moment when the Palladium warrior would demonstrate exactly why his species was feared across the galaxy. Instead, the impossible happened. Krix'tar extended his hand, this 3-fingered claw covered in black chitin that looked like it could slice through steel, and gently, almost reverently, touched George's palm. "I am honored." "George Frash of Terra," he said, and there was something in that growling voice that might have been surprise. "Few possess courage enough to stand near a son of Palladium. Now here's the kicker." George smiled, actually smiled, and said, "It's not courage, it's curiosity. Your tactical warfare methods are legendary. I could learn a lot from you." And that's when something magical happened. All 4 of Krix'tar's eyes blazed brighter, and if you knew anything about Palladium culture, which George apparently did, you'd know that recognition of skill was the highest form of respect they could give. "And I from you, little warrior," Krix'tar rumbled back. "Your ancestors transformed a world of death into a garden through sheer determination. That requires a strength that few understand." The laughter died in everyone's throats. There was something about the way these two were talking. No fear, no pretension, just mutual respect. That was simultaneously fascinating and deeply unsettling to watch. "All right." "Terra Palladium team," Zythara interrupted, trying to wrestle back control of her classroom. "You'll be commanding the 3rd Federation Fleet. Your mission is to break the Andromedans' blockade in Sector 7. The holographic projectors hummed to life, creating this incredible 3-dimensional battlefield in the center of the room. Dozens of spaceships materialized in the air, with each pair of students controlling their own fleet through neural interfaces. Now, the standard strategy they taught at the Academy was pretty straightforward. Wedge formation, concentrated force at the enemy center, quick breakthrough of their lines. George watched as the other teams implemented various versions of this approach. And honestly, it was textbook stuff. "What's your take, partner?" George asked Krix'tar. "What's your take, partner?" George asked Krix'tar. The Palladium warrior studied the holographic field, those 4 red eyes tracing invisible patterns between the enemy ships like he was reading some kind of cosmic map. "On Palladium, we hunt in packs. Divided force confuses the prey." "Interesting," George said, analyzing the Andromedans' formation. "They're expecting frontal assaults. Look how they've concentrated their defenses at the center. But they've left the flanks with just automated sensors. And this is where things got absolutely beautiful to watch. Working together with this surprising synchronicity, they split their fleet into 3 smaller groups. While every other team was charging straight ahead and getting hammered by heavy defensive fire, George and Krix'tar put on what can only be described as a deadly dance of coordinated attacks. "Now," George whispered, spotting a momentary gap in the enemy formations. Krix'tar let out this low growl, which in Palladium culture meant fierce approval, and executed a maneuver that transformed their divided attack into this lethal pincer movement. In minutes, not hours, the Andromedans' blockade was completely shattered. The silence in the room had changed. This wasn't fear anymore, this was grudging admiration. The unlikely duo had accomplished something the other teams hadn't even attempted. Total victory with minimal losses through pure innovative strategy. Impressive, Zithara admitted. And coming from her, that was basically a standing ovation. You've combined Palladium intuition with Terran analysis in a way that's unexpected. What's your take, partner? George asked Krix'tar. The Palladium warrior studied the holographic field, those four red eyes tracing invisible patterns between the enemy ships like he was reading some kind of cosmic map. On Palladium, we hunt in packs. Divided force confuses the prey. Interesting, George said, analyzing the Andromedans' formation. They're expecting frontal assaults. Look how they've concentrated their defenses at the center. But they've left the flanks with just automated sensors. And this is where things got absolutely beautiful to watch. Working together with this surprising synchronicity, they split their fleet into 3 smaller groups. While every other team was charging straight ahead and getting hammered by heavy defensive fire, George and Krix'tar put on what can only be described as a deadly dance of coordinated attacks. Now, George whispered, spotting a momentary gap in the enemy formations. Krix'tar let out this low growl, which in Palladium culture meant fierce approval, and executed a maneuver that transformed their divided attack into this lethal pincer movement. In minutes, not hours, the Andromedans' blockade was completely shattered. The silence in the room had changed. This wasn't fear anymore, this was grudging admiration. The unlikely duo had accomplished something the other teams hadn't even attempted. Total victory with minimal losses through pure innovative strategy. Impressive, Zithara admitted. And coming from her, that was basically a standing ovation. You've combined Palladium intuition with Terran analysis in a way that's unexpected.